In previous videos, I presented undeniable evidence of life after death and explained where we go after it. I also clarified what dreams really are and showed the tragic consequences that suicides face after their death. Additionally, I shared several of the many NDE stories I have gathered over more than 20 years of researching death and life beyond the material body. If you haven't watched them yet, I encourage you to click on the name of my channel and the video tab, where you'll find all the videos I've created so far. However, in this episode, I will present to you another NDE story from my collection. This is the story of a World War II veteran who nearly died during one of the partisan actions. When he left his body, the Virgin Mary revealed the future of his country to him. Let's begin.
Some time ago, I was in a hospital, sharing a room with an elderly man named Wladislaw. Both of us were there due to heart problems. My heart was still somewhat holding up, but his was beating with its last strength. And no wonder, as he had lived to be 95 years old. When they brought him in, he was already quite weak, but he still tried to strike up conversations with me. It was clear that he enjoyed chatting with people. He smiled very often. Even though he was clearly in poor health, there was still a fire burning in his eyes. On one hand, you could see a strong character in them, and on the other, a warmth and kindness. His eyes were so lively that they didn't match his old, ailing body. He talked about so many things. I had the impression that he could speak on any subject. He also mentioned that he had fought against the Germans, so as a history enthusiast, I naturally pursued this topic. His stories were incredible. We marvel at James Bond on the big screen, but during the occupation, every other partisan fighter performed similarly daring feats. Listening to such stories, you might think these people had no nervous system or were simply crazy. But the story that made the biggest impression on me was about the day he died. Or rather, the day he died and came back to life. In 1943, he was active in the Polish Underground National Army. Together with his unit, they carried out ambushes on Germans and executed traitors. During one such operation, they set up an ambush on a small enemy unit in the forest. A road ran through the forest, and the enemy was expected to pass through it. They hoped to capture some weapons and ammunition. They positioned themselves on both sides of the road in such a way as to avoid accidentally firing at each other. On one side, there was a slope rising above the road, and on the other, the slope gradually descended into the forest. Mr. Wladek was on the lower side. Their task was to shoot those trying to take cover behind the trees or retreat into the forest. He said they waited so long that eventually the commander gave the order to abort the mission. But just as they were gathering, they heard the sounds of vehicles approaching on the road. They quickly returned to their positions, though they couldn't take them as well as before. However, there was no time for adjustments. A motorcycle with a sidecar, in which a machine gunner was seated, appeared from around the bend. Right behind it was a military truck with a tarp-covered bed. Another truck followed, and at the rear, another motorcycle with a sidecar. The partisans waited for the enemy to reach the optimal spot. When they did, one of Wladek's comrades threw a grenade that exploded between the first motorcycle and the truck. The blast wiped out the motorcyclists and shattered the truck's windows, wounding the soldiers inside and forcing the vehicle to stop. Immediately after the explosion, shots rang out from the hillside. Almost instantly, they hit the motorcyclist, bringing up the rear, and the motorcycle slammed into the back of the second truck. The enemy began to jump out from under the tarp, taking cover behind the trucks and nearby trees, and returning fire. This was the signal for those on the other side of the road to open fire. The surprised Germans fell like flies. However, one of them managed to grab a grenade and threw it right next to Mr. Wladek. Without thinking much, he grabbed it from the ground and tossed it back toward the enemy. Unfortunately, it didn't make it there and exploded in midair. The blast threw Wladek against a tree. He said that for a moment, everything went dark, but then the vision returned. That's when he realized he was floating above the battlefield in the treetops. The skirmish was still ongoing. When he looked at the spot where he had been a moment ago, he saw his body lying under the tree. It seemed that the grenade had only hit him, as his comrades were still firing. He recounted that he could see the entire battlefield simultaneously from all angles. He saw those on the hill as well as those on the other side. He also saw a few of the enemy survivors trying to flee, but they were quickly cut down by bullets. The shooting ceased. Two of his comrades ran over to his body and began administering aid. He said he felt strange. Just moments before, he had been completely absorbed in the battle, in a combat frenzy. And now, the fight didn't seem to matter to him. He felt a blissful peace. He even wondered why the war was happening at all. After all, there were no real benefits, and nearly everyone suffered, both the aggressors and the defenders. After a while, his thoughts drifted elsewhere. He began to wonder what would happen to him now. Had he been good enough to go to heaven? That's when a bright light appeared above him. He said it was as bright as the sun, but it didn't hurt his eyes. From the light came a feeling of love. He heard a pleasant feminine voice calling, "Wadek, come to me, it's time." He didn't see anyone, but he felt it was the Virgin Mary calling him. As soon as he thought about entering the light, he began to drift toward it. When he entered it, he found himself almost instantly in a beautiful place. He was surrounded by white and gold clouds. He heard wonderful music, which he described as angelic choirs. He floated freely for a moment, admiring it all. The feeling of love and bliss completely filled him. Suddenly, he saw an enormous golden throne on one of the clouds. Seated on it was a beautiful woman. He said he had never seen such a beautiful person in his life. He felt it was the Virgin Mary. Then he heard her call again, "Come to me, Wadek." He approached her and asked if he was worthy of entering heaven. The woman smiled and replied that it was not yet time for such a journey, and that in a moment he would have to return to his body, as his comrades had managed to save him. He humbly replied that he would do as she commanded. And that's when thoughts of life on earth returned to him. He knew he would have to return to the hell of war. The woman seemed to read his thoughts and said, "Don't worry, the war will end soon." He rejoiced and asked if Poland would be free. The Virgin Mary looked somewhat saddened and said that his country would pass from hand to hand for many years. The occupiers would change, and with each one, the Polish people would increasingly fail to see that they were still in captivity. Mr. Wadek was deeply saddened and asked if Poland would regain its full freedom in his lifetime. She replied that everything was in the hands of those who live in this world. Those who allow themselves to be enslaved will be enslaved, and those who radiate mercy and freedom will indeed be free. She added, "You have my support, but it is your deeds that create your world." Then he felt a force pulling him, and a moment later, he awoke in his body in a barn. He recounted that he had sustained serious injuries which kept him out of combat until the end of the war. He remained a member of the National Army, but due to his limited physical abilities, he was assigned much less dangerous tasks. He remembered his reflections on the senselessness of war and the Virgin Mary's words about living in love. He even claimed that her intervention was the reason he no longer had to kill. I was very curious about how his life turned out after the war ended. Unfortunately, I never got the chance to ask because Mr. Władysław passed away.
And so, here is another NDE story that provides us with knowledge about death and life beyond the material body. Once again, we see clearly that the religion we follow during our lives has a significant impact on what we experience after death. It's also worth noting the prophecy our hero received. In my opinion, It aligns perfectly with Poland's post-war history. But without a doubt, the most important message is to live in love, which is said to make our lives better. I dedicated an entire chapter to the role of love, both in this material life and the non-material life, in my publication. In it, you'll also find much more, as I've included all the knowledge about life beyond the material body that I have gathered over more than 20 years of research and personal experience. You can find a link to purchase it in the description below the video. I've also included my email address there, where you can send your own NDE experiences or those of your loved ones or acquaintances. I'll try to turn them into future videos, if that is your will. And that's all for today. Thank you so much for being here, and see you next time.